It's fine.
Okay, we're starting the shir now. 6th shir on Bar Metzra. Now, we all know that Shavuos is connected to Bar Metzra, so even though what we're going to be talking about in this shir is not connected to Bar Metzra, it's going to be a longer shir today because of, first of all, catching up, and things that were discussed previously that have to be continued. I'm going to be doing 4 Sa'ifim today. Start a little bit in a different Seder in the Shulchan Aruch. We'll do Lamed Beis, Lamed Gimel. Then we'll go back to Chavav, Chav Zayin. That's going to be today's shir. And then next shir is going to go to Chav Ches and weiter. In the last shir, we spoke about financial concerns that could cancel Bar Metzra. Today we're going to continue from another angle of financial issues that could cancel Bar Metzra and the dinim of oinus, which are connected to financial reasons if somebody's not able to get the money. So that's why I'm starting with Lamed Beis, Lamed Gimel, which are really connected to what was learned in Sa'ifim, Chav Dalet, Chav Hei, etc. What we're going to be talking about today is about if somebody is claiming Bar Metzra, but he doesn't have the money at hand at the moment. So, Sif Lamed Beis, that's essentially Sif Lamed Beis. Sif Lamed Beis, the Mechaber writes, we'll call it 4 separate dinim that are relevant to this case. So we know that the Matzrin has to wait, the Matzrin has a certain amount of time to go home and get money, and go home and be tevei the person at the Torah. And we say that if a person, the Mechaber says, if the Matzrin waited the amount of time that he has to go home and get money, and he did not call the guy to Adon Torah during that time, then he is lost his chus of being a Matzrin. However, the Mechaber says there's a condition to it. The condition to it is that the sale is known to the public and hechzik ba'amatzrin. The matzrin was already machzik in the, not the matzrin, I mean the lekeach was already machzik in it. Basically two things, and we'll soon see if you need both or only some of them. The Ramah adds two more dinim in this siman, in the seif. If he was a onus, and that's why he wasn't able to bring the money, he did not lose his schus. And if you look in the next Sif, in Lamed Gimel, which is also connected to Oinus, the Mechaber says that if the Matzrin could bring Eidim that they threatened him not to interfere with the sale, then after the Oinus passes, he did not, and he comes and makes a Tviyah, then he does not lose his rights. The same idea you also have in Sif Yud Aleph, which we learned in the past, that I'm over there writes over there regarding when you have a bunch of matzronim and one matzron threatens the other ones, and that's how I was able to get the whole property, that they also don't lose the thing. So that's the din of anus. And the next din that we have over here is if the reason why the matzron was quiet is because he made a mistake and he thought that for whatever reason, he misunderstood the concept of Bar Metzra, and he thought that money from the sale is going to come to him, either because he felt that maybe he has a claim to the property or whatever it is, that the property really belongs to him. And then when he found out that the sale went through, he went and he found out that the sale went through, and he found out that he's not getting the money that he expected he's going to get from the sale. Then he wants to go and get rid of the lekeach, then he did not lose his right. That is essentially a summary of Seif Lamed Beis and also basically Seif Lamed Gimel. And you go through the details of this Seif Lamed Beis, which is the first Seif we're going to be discussing today. Go through each one of the points, and again, like every other halacha in the Siman, there's a lot of nafkaminas going in all directions. First point, if the matzrin waited and didn't do the tviyah on time, he lost his right. Why is that he lost his rights? The Smeh uses an interesting lashon, the hoyoda, he knew about it. And since he didn't do a tviyah, it's the haraya that he was moichel his right of bar metzra. So the reason is mitzad mechila. He knows, he doesn't do anything about his knowledge, but the mere fact that you know and you don't act upon what you know, it counts as a mechila. That's how the Smeh understands it, it's medin mechila. The Mata Shimon says nothing to do with mechila. He says it in the name, the Mata Shimon in Hagoy Satur Oisnun, in the name of Beis Yehuda, which is Rav Yehuda Ayash, that it's nothing to do with mechila. It's not because we claim that for sure there was mechila, but rather we go back to something which we know already. The Chachamim were mesaken in specific scenarios, and the Chachamim were mesaken that a matzrin that wastes his time loses his right. And that is even if we know with the clarity and we know for a fact that the matzrin was not meichel. The mere fact that he was shoha, the takonas Chachamim is that by shoha you lose your right. You could damage the moicher, yeah. You could damage the moicher. The lekeach is going to have his money hanging in a place, and he has no field, and he's out of money. He's going to end up with not being able to make to make profit of the money, etc. This doesn't say specifically the reason. The Aruch HaShulchan seems to imply this in Sif Chafalev, seems to imply also like the Smeh, that it's midin mechila. Yeah, so that is, we have basically two views on it. The Smeh that it's midin mechila, and it's vaday mechila, that because he knew and he didn't do anything about it, didn't act as vaday mechila. And we have the Mata Shimon that is mitzat takonas Chachamim. There are certain nafkaminas between the two. Or the main nafkamina is if you know for sure that he was not meichel. If he did a statement to show that he's not meichel, according to the Smeh, there might be a reason to argue about it. Now, the Taz over here brings the Shita of the Rambam. The Rambam has even further than what the Mechaber doesn't pass like the Rambam, but the Rambam says that if a person, the Taz brings the Shita of the Rambam, that if the matzrin did not see the lekeach breaking and building and doing construction on his property, he could be masalik him even a long time later. And not like the Mechaber says, that the Mechaber Paskin says it's not so. The Mata Shimon in Agoyes Beis Yosef, Ois Chofei, says you can't brush off the Rambam. We have a suffix. Do we paskin like the Rambam? Do we not paskin like the Rambam? And therefore, in such a scenario, the lekeach is zoiche misafik. In a scenario when so basically the din ends up the same way, but from a different reason. What's the nafkamina? If the matzrin was muchzak in this land, but he doesn't have it. If the matzin is already muchzak, the matzin is muchzak, and the whole reason why you would paskin that the matzin loses by shah in such a scenario when there was no seiser rabbeinu as mitzad as safek, and by safek ein mitzim yad muchzak. So if the matzin is a muchzak, then you lose out. Then the matzrin keeps it, even though if you would paskin like the mechaber, the matzrin would not get to keep it.
I thought the whole case is that the buyer already had it for a long time.
Buyer doesn't have it such a long time. The buyer owns it. He didn't do any construction. For some reason, the matzah ended up being the muchzak over there. So you can't. So the matzah ends up with it. Obviously, if the lekeach is the muchzik, because over here he didn't do any action. So the question is, how does he? Maybe he was worried. Maybe he was using it for 3 years. Whatever it was, the guy was abandoned. The Choshen writes a similar thing in Mishpat Choshen Eis and Aleph. Now, one of the things that the Mechaber says over here, that if you know that it's only if the Mechira was known and if Shah and you didn't bring the money, right? Where do you have to bring the money to? The Svara is you're supposed to call him to Bezdin and bring the money then. So if the Matzrin finds out on Chol HaMoed that the sale happened, that's when it became public. Or that's when the sale happened. Because when you are in certain places, a Davar HaOved, if you don't finalize the sale on this day, somebody else is going to get it. So the sale happened on Chol HaMoed. Now everybody knows, but they didn't close on Chol HaMoed. The only thing you do on Chol HaMoed is Gittin B'Shas HaTchak. Otherwise, but there's no Din Teilis on Chol HaMoed. And so therefore he didn't bring the money then. Yeah, he brought the money Isru Chag. When Bezdin reopened, he brought the money. So the Shach brings from the tshuva of the Mabit, and the Nesivis brings that this is the halacha, Paskan Zagat halacha, Sifkot and Lamed, that he did not lose his right, even though Bezdin technically could sit on Chol HaMoed if there's an emergency. That means it's not that the Bezdin is out of town. If the Bezdin is out of town, it's something else. If there's no Bezdin in town, it's something else. But if there's a Bezdin in town, which they're on vacation, so they didn't leave town. Technically, you go and call all three of them to a room and do your tviyah. But there's no official Moshe of Bezdin. There's no Bezdin doesn't officially sit in the Chol HaMoed. So therefore, the Matzrin didn't lose his right by him waiting from the first day of Chol HaMoed until Isru Chag. And like I mentioned, if there's no Bezdin in town, so you can't even do your tviyah, the Mata Shimon in the Great says that if there's no Bezdin in town, it's the same as Chol HaMoed. Why? You have to wait until you're able to reach a Bezdin. Today is only relevant, practically speaking, because today you can reach a Bezdin by email, you could send a Hazmana. If a Bezdin office is open, then the Bezdin office is open, and you could start your tviyah right away. You don't have to have a Bezdin in town. There's people you could send Hazmanas for any country you are in the world. There's Batadim which will send Hazmanas right away. And even if there's no Bezdin in town, even as let's say it's Erev Shabbos, you could send Hazmanas on Erev Shabbos, whatever the situation is. If the secretary is working on that day, then you have your responsibility of calling the Bezdin or a Bezdin and trying to get the tviyah out. Now, what comes interesting from it is if I send an email to the Bezdin that I want to start a Din Torah on that day, and the Bezdin didn't do it. I filed the application and and I paid for it, or whatever the price is, or $50, $150, whatever the price of, depending on which Bezdin you go to, and the secretary did not send it. So I did my part, right? If I'm able to prove that I send it within the amount of time, I didn't lose my right of Bar-Metzra. Even though the Hazmana didn't go out until a week later, because the secretary was out of town. There are such situations. It could be Chanukah L'Mashal, when the secretaries go on vacation, or Isru Chag, the guy is flying back. So you're going to say, well, Shah Matzin, it wasn't Shah Matzin, Shah Maskir. The Matzin did his job. So as long as the Matzin could show that he did his part, he is good. He is good to go. Now, if you have a suffix, whether there was enough time whether enough time transpired that the Matzrin loses his right or not, and there was no action done on the property yet, which the Rambam says is not. So over here you have a suffix, you have a svek, which will allow the lekeach to keep the field. What's a svek? It's a suffix for suffix. Maybe you waited enough time that you lost your right. And even if you didn't wait enough time to lose your right, maybe you pass on like the Rambam, And even though lechatchila we not going to pass against the Shulchan Aruch, but when you're talking about a sfek sveika, you could even use a far-fetched suffix. Let's go back now for a second. We mentioned that the Aruch HaShulchan paskins that the whole logic why shaha is mitzad, that you were shaisek is mitzad mechila, like the Semeh. So the Aruch HaShulchan adds another point over here. In addition, a nirali point. He says, if the lekeach comes to Bezdin, and he says, I know, he knew, and he was shaisek, and he was meichel. It's my taina. The Matzrin says, I didn't know. When I found out, I called you to Bezdin. It was a month later. So the Aruch HaShulchan says, the Matzrin that has to do a shvuah. It has to do a shvuah. Says is nishma v'noitel. And why? And he says over there to take a shvuah for the Matzrin that he didn't know is something which makes sense. Why? Because a lot of times people don't find out right away what's going on. But the lekeach cannot do the shvuah on it. How could the lekeach know what the Matzrin knew or not? The lekeach can't take a shvuah that the Matzrin knew. He could take a shvuah that the Matzrin could take a shvuah that he didn't know.
The Lashon HaMechaber is that Davka B'Sheshem is Gal HaMechel B'Nei Ha'ir. It doesn't sound like, as long as it's not seen in the Lashon HaMechaber.
Yes, but what happens if he says, what's it,
As long as B'Nei Ha'ir is, it's like if you knew. That's the Lashon HaMechaber. The other Lashon HaMechaber,
if it's a big city, New York, it's 8 million people. No, they'll call B'nei Ha'ir. Do you know every person? Forget about the Kol B'nei Ha'ir in Crown Heights.
Martin's probably following by itself.
If you know, Good, so that's what Aruch HaShulchan says. So if the lekeach comes, the lekeach could force a shvuah on him. If the lekeach says, I know he knew about it. How do I know he knew about it? So could be the lekeach could prove it. The lekeach could prove that it was sent to that there was a message sent by somebody, a text message maybe, that his friend sent to the Matzah. Tells him, by the way, you should know that the house next door to you was just sold to Pliny ben Pliny.
So according to what you said about Razmana,
yeah.
Technically you can take the next and also Zel, you could do Zel.
What?
If so, the whole is not shot.
You can't sell $2 million.
What?
You can't sell $2 million. You can't send by Zelle $2 million. You could send a wire of that amount of money. Yes, that's what I said. That's what I said. If the bank is open, you have that's the amount of time it takes to get the money. I said last year. And if you wait,
Nowadays it's nothing. You do it on money.
Depends how much. If only if the bank is open, you could send big amounts. Only if you have $1 million in PayPal, you could transfer it to another account. In Zelle, you can't do that amount. There's a $3,500 limit. One day you'll know these things.
Oh, man.
Okay, the next thing is, we're going to move into the next topic, which is Nizgale HaMecher Livnei O'ir. The Mechaber says two things: Nizgale HaMecher Livnei O'ir, to the whole city, Ve'hechzik Alekeach Bekarka. Rabbi Kiva Eger points out right away, the fact that the Mechaber had to write Ve'hechzik Bekarka means you need both Sai Nizgale Livnei O'ir and Sai Hechzik. If you have one without the other, it's not enough for the Matzrin to lose his right. The Mata Shimon says no. Mata Shimon Agoy Satur Oisnan Aleph, the way he explains it. So he explains this lashon of the Torah. No, it's enough if the sale was public. That's enough in this Gal of Neir. You don't need the hechzik alekech. What's public? Nisparsim. So the Taz points out over here something the Beis Yosef wrote in the name of the Rashba. Yeah, even though the Beis Yosef himself doesn't pass like that. But the Beis Yosef brings in the name of the Rashba that even if they didn't make an announcement, there was no public announcement about it, but there was a kinyan with Eidim, it's already considered Pirsum. Why? Because Eidim have a koil, which is what we learned if you learned it in Siman Samaches in Choshen Mishpat. And the only time that there is no pirsum is if the sale was done in such a way intentionally to hide the sale. Which means, let's say this was bought, there was no name written on the sale, it was an LLC or whatever it is, a company, so you have no way, you don't know who you're chasing, or there was done in a way that there's no, that the kavanah to hide it, then it's not considered pirsa. The Erech HaShulchan, Tayyib, says, what's the nafkamina, what comes out, what halacha is relevant to if there was pirsa or there wasn't pirsa, or if there was edom or there wasn't edom. It says nafkamina is if you bought from a goy, or you bought in Erkois. So then, putting aside whether there's bar metzra from a goy or not, let's leave that aside for a minute. The matzrin, if the sale was done in Erkois, the matzrin has a right to say, I didn't know. Why? This is the Erech HaShulchan pasuk like that. Why? Because the machlek is mechaber Rama and Siman Samaches. If which edom have a koil, the mechaber paskins that only Edei Yisrael have a koil. The Rama paskins that also Edei Akum have a koil. So according to the mechaber, if only Edei Yisrael have a koil and you did the sale in Erkois, so there's only Edei Akum if Bechlal. So therefore, in such a scenario, according to the mechaber, there's no koil. If there's no koil, the matzrin didn't lose his right. So if a Jew sells to a Jew, the lekeach bought it from the moicher in Erkois, through Erkois, that according to the mechaber there's no koil. According to the Rama there is koil. So according to the mechaber, you didn't lose your right. You only when you found out about it. According to the Rama, he did lose his right. And if you see that, so that's how the Erech HaShulchan paskins like the mechaber, obviously. The Mishpat Shalom, Marsham, paskins like the Rama, obviously, and that's why he says that there is a koil in such a scenario. If you buy a koil, should go Mishpat Shalom in Kuntas Mishmer Shalom Oisidal, that there is. So therefore, if it's the way sales are done today, that there is no edom, it's registered on the government things. And it takes time. In New York, there's Acris, it's called Acris. You could search anybody who bought a house in the last, 100 years, the records. You could see who bought from who. But it doesn't get filed right away. It doesn't go on the system right away. It takes some time till it goes on the system. In New York, it's pretty fast. Other places, upstate, and Orange County or other counties, it's going to be a few weeks till something goes up. Slomer Zogan, you did it that way with a lawyer. The lawyer was a goy, there's no edom, whatever it is. And until it becomes known, so that it's official, and there's no koil. There is a way that you could pay a service of a few dollars a month, that you could have a certain, whatever the house number is, the block number, and they will send you alerts whenever there's a change in the city registries. But even then, when does a change happen? Could be 2 or 3 weeks later once it gets filed. So the registering in the city, this is what the Minchas Yitzchak writes in Chelik Zayin, Siman Kuf Chav Daled, that the registering in the tabu and so on, and that's Yisrael, but over here it's called the Akris. That's the same thing as the Kosher Goyim, and it has no koil.
How long have you saying this city, people could know about it?
Not could know, people do know.
No, but you're saying once it actually went into the file, and people could know about it.
Could know about it if they search.
I have to be searching it. That's Pshat Nisgal Be'er.
What's in Nisgal Be'er? That the house was sold. How do you know if a house is sold? Depends what. So Yesh Le'Koil in New York is only when you have a big house that's been on the market for a while, or it's one of the big corner houses. In the Crown Heights, I could tell you. I know when the house in this corner was sold in President in New York. I could tell you when the house on Brooklyn and Crown was sold. I could tell you when the house on President in Kingston was sold. These houses I know. There's Koil.
Yeah, there's a Koil. They put down sold.
No, but they don't even have to put this thing signed sold. These things, you hear about them in shul while the contract is going on. And the big buildings, there's blogs, there's websites that say when this Gvir bought this building's in Manhattan, moved from hand to hand, that becomes public knowledge. But somebody bought a house in Flatbush or Brownsville or some other, or in the smaller or the not so hot properties in Crown Heights, it's love dafka there's a koil for it right away, even in this shchuna. Forget about the whole city.
So then what would be the din? When would be considered as God here?
I have to find out. I guess probably when there's a way of knowing about it. The Mishpat Shalom that I mentioned before, in Kuntras Mishmar Shalom Oisi Daled, goes into a whole, that after he says that, according to the Ramok, also Eidei Akum, he goes and says, let's go back a step. Bichlal, I don't have an issue with the Rashba. The Rashba that says that if there was, even if there's no announcement, as long as there was a kinyan with Eidim, there is a koil and then he loses his schos. He says, we have a tshuva from the Marit, Chelik Beis, Choshen Mishpat, Siman Samaches, that a koil is not a chacha. Why? Because maybe they had an intention to hide it. So even if there was Eidim, lav dafka, there's a koil. So therefore, he says, the Marit says that when do you lose your right? Only if the lekeah, the matzah was notified. First point, matzah has to be notified. Or it became so famous that by the lekeah living over there. The lekeah lives over there, that's considered already famous. That became that there was a pirsum, therefore the Maharit over there says it all depends on the city. A big city takes longer, a small city takes shorter. And the Mishpat Shalom says, if you want to follow the shit of the Maharit and the Rashba, that it goes based on when he's notified, either or, according to the way the Maharit understands the Rashba, because that's how the Maharit explains that it can't be Stam HaKoil, it has to be that he was notified. So you need 1 or 2 days to wait from when he finds out. And if you already did it via Bezdin, then all you need is the amount of time to walk home and come back. Right? Because there's 2 different time frames over here. There's a time frame how long you have a chance to be Teveya, which is a day or 2, depending on which Ida. And there's also how much time you have to bring money, which that could be a few hours to go home, or a few minutes. If the bank is open, you could do it online. And he says, but none of the poskim said that there's a difference in time between one and the other, and therefore he says that tzarechiyun, if you could paskin like the Rashba, the way the Marit says that he has to be notified, or he paskin like the Rashba, the way the Taz understands it, that there is a koil, and then he leaves the tzarechiyun. Then he concludes something which I mentioned before, that the moment you do a tviyah and bezdin, it's already, according to the smeh, that shika is midin mechila, not mitzat hakanas chachamim. So the moment you do a tviyah and bezdin, if you do it right away, that's already a proof that there is no mechila, and therefore, even if he doesn't need the Bezdin for the process of paying the money, the fact that he already was Teveya him in Bezdin, he could say, I don't have to go to Bezdin to bring the money in Bezdin. I could settle it in my own house. I could go to his house and bring him a bag of cash. I could send a wire to him. So the moment he does that is already ois mechila. But if he did not do a Tviyah in Bezdin, and he said, I don't have to do a Tviyah in Bezdin, he just sends him a message, I want to pay you outside Bezdin, and then we say that there's no mechila because he notified him he wants to pay him, or specifically we need a tviyah in Bezdin, he says tzarechiyun. Also, the Mishpat Shalom remains in tzarechiyun.
Well, this question was before his question, why is there no second time frame?
Yeah, he says nobody says that there's a one time frame for bringing money and one time frame for doing a tviyah in Bezdin. The way the Marit understands the Rashba, that there is that you have, once you get notified that you have the notification, then you have a Tviyah and Bez, and it seems like it's two separate time frames, therefore he says Tzarech Iyun, he doesn't conclude one way or the other. We'll go one more point in this Sif, then we'll move on to the next Sif. Yeah. So now the Ramah says that if he was a Oinus, he didn't lose his right. Yeah, this is what the Ramah says. And I mentioned that the same thing is also, but the Edom is mentioned in the Edom that he was threatened is mentioned in Sif Lamed Gimel, and there's also in Sif Yud Aleph. Then the Sivis over here right away points out that when did the Oinus happen? Obviously must be that the Oinus happened after the sale. Not that the Oinus happened before the sale, that he didn't even, he says, when the sale happened, he was fine. Then he found out about it. And he right away wanted to go to Bezdin and bring money. And the Oinus happened. Then, this Oinus is enough that he shouldn't lose his right. But if he was an Onus when the sale happened, that we're going to see in Sif Lamed Daled that there is no, he was out of town, he lost. That's the next Sif, you're not going to get to it now. Now, the Beis Yaakov over here points out that obviously we're talking about not only that he was nenas, that he couldn't bring money, but there has to be that he notified the Lekeach, I'm planning on buying it from you and I'm going to bring you money, and then suddenly Oinus happened. Not that he was nenas from doing the Tviyah. He adds another layer to it. He says, because otherwise, Loksa Midas Hadin, the Lekeach is going to stay hanging. Maybe the Lekeach says, if the Lekeach doesn't know, maybe the Lekeach is not so gung-ho about this property. Hey, he bought it because it's an investment. Now he's going to come, he's going to realize that there's going to be a fight about it. He's like, whatever, forget about it, I'm going to walk off the deal. And he will just take the money and transfer it to him. If he doesn't know that the Lekei, that the Matzrin wants to get it, then he's going to have to wait until the Oinus passes. Until the Matzrin decides what he wants to do, until the Matzrin shows up with money. So therefore, the Oinus has to happen not only after the sale, after he tells them, the Lekeach, I want to buy it. I want to pay you off I want to pay you whatever you paid. Choshen ve'efa, the Mishpat Choshen Sefkot Nun, over here adds on to it. Also another detail of Oinus. How long is this Oinus? Could you use a taina of Oinus? He says it has to be a short time, also because the end of Dover Seif. It has to be a very short time. Zman Kotzar is a short time frame. If it's longer, if it's a long Oinus, then he loses his right, even if it's Taka and Oinus. The Oinus is only a teretz for a short time frame. Now, what constitutes an Oinus? So the Chalas Lechem, also one of the beautiful in Mishpat, says that if the reason why you couldn't bring the money is because you were busy in your business, people are busy. You were busy working, didn't have a chance to bring the money, it's not considered the Oinus. Oinus is only an Oinus that, let's say, the Bezdin didn't tell him how long he has. That Bezdin did not determine when he has to bring it, and it's an Oinus that it's not the Oinus that he caused on himself, like he's being busy with his work. It's something happened. Oinus happened to him that was not dependent on him, not that he chose to be busy or he is busy. Doesn't count as Oinus. The Chalas Lechem says. The Aruch HaShulchan is the other one who speaks about being busy with your business. He says, don't forget. He says in Sif Chaf Aleph that if a person was told me'oid, was very busy with his business, he didn't lose his right. Now, who has the responsibility of proving Oinus? Chalas Lechem says the responsibility is on the Matzrin. If the Matzrin comes and says, I was an Onus, it's not enough that he just claims it. And the Lekeach doesn't even have to argue with him. The Bezdin tells him, prove that you were Onus. And he has to prove it with Eidim, like in the next seif. It's not enough to just claim that he was that he claimed that he was an anus. Chas Lechem writes it in Seif Lamed Beis and in Seif Lamed Gimel. Yeah, and with that we covered we finished the topic of financials, which we started last week. Now let's move on to two other seifim in the Siman, where Dina de Bar Metzra doesn't apply for other reasons, not because of financials. Like I said before we started the Siman, that most of the Siman is exclusions to Bar Metzra, not how Bar Metzra works, but when Bar Metzra doesn't work. So we're gonna, like I said before, we did Lamed Beis, Lamed Gimel, we're gonna go back to Sif Chavav now. Do Chavav Chav Zayin. Sif Chavav. Yeah, the Mechaber over there says if the Lekeach wants to build a house, and the Matzrin wants to plant seeds, plant grain, then the Lekeach has more of a right because of Yishuv Haaretz. Soon see what Yishuv Haaretz means. If the Lekeach wants to build houses, and the Matzrin wants to plant trees, the Matzrin gets it. This is how the Smeh understands this seif. So again, I'm explaining it the way the Smeh understands it. You have houses come before grains, planting grains. Trees come before houses. And this is the definition of Yishuv Haaretz. Why? How does the Smeh understand this concept of Yishuv Haaretz? Yishuv Haaretz means what has more permanence in the earth. A house is more permanent than a wheat field. But a house, you could knock it off. Doesn't become part of the earth. A tree sends roots and becomes part of the earth. So a tree is more than a house. And that's how the Smeh understands it. That's how he explains the Mechaber, and that's how he's medayek from the Tur. More than a house.
It sounds like timeless. I thought it's more involved.
I think it's because, the way I understood it is because it's more ingrained into the house. And I'll tell you why, because later there's a machlekes. If someone has a house that's rocks in a house versus a house of wood, which one is more kavua? If there is, according to machlekes, one of the Achrayim, we're going to get to it later, discusses whether, according to the Smeh, there's a difference between two kinds of houses. Next thing the Smeh says, this Yishuv Haaretz is not the classic Yishuv Haaretz that we always say, the mitzvah of settling Eretz Yisrael. This also applies in Chutz La'aretz. It's about what has more permanence in the ground. The Smeh adds even more. The way the Smeh understands that the trees have preference over houses. So if the Matzin wants to build a house, and the Lekeach wants to plant trees, so then that's how the Smeh understands it. The Lekeach knocks out the Bar Metzra because there's more Yishuv Haaretz over here. Now, he sends you to look in the Prisha. The Smeh tells you, go look at what I wrote in the Prisha. What does he write in the Prisha? And the Prisha also adds another point over here. It says, you would have thought that Yishuv of a house is more than, even more than trees. Why is that? Because you could buy, what does a tree generate to you? Fruits. You could buy fruits in the marketplace. A house, much harder to find. So therefore, you would think that a person who wants to build a house, if he wants to build a house, he has more preference over somebody who wants to plant trees, because just less available. He says, no, that's exactly what the Gemara wanted to tell you, what the Torah wants to tell you, that it's not about what's easier to get, it's about what's more ingrained in the karka. And then he throws an additional point. He says, just by the way, you should just know that the Beis Yosef already wrote that because Bar Metzra is a takonas chazal of Mitzvah Sisa Yoshev HaToiv, then even a tiny koldehu, any tiny you could get rid of Bar Metzra. But here, you can't get rid of Bar Metzra for that. And the Prish over there, he also explains, he repeats what he says over there. If somebody if one person, if there are two matzranim, one matzran wants two matzranim on two sides of the field. Usually what we would do, we split it between the two matzranim. So he says, based on the Tur, that trees come before houses and houses come before grains. So if you have two matzranim, one wants to do planting, one wants to do a house. One wants to do a house, one wants to do grains. Then whoever is higher in the list of preference, as a single matzran, he's able to take out the other matzran. Like, get the whole field for himself. That is essentially the shit of the Smeh, the way he explains it in the Smeh, and the way he himself explains it even more in the Prisha. The Smeh, most of the time, a lot of times the Smeh is a summary of the Prisha. The Taz goes and says this whole Smeh makes no sense. The whole shit of the Smeh makes no sense. He says, a house and a tree are both Yishuv. Okay, one is one level of Yishuv, one is a different level of Yishuv. How could you say that there is different levels in Yishuv where one Yishuv could knock out another Yishuv? The Lashon is that because of Yishuv Haaretz, something which is Yishuv Haaretz comes before something which is not Yishuv Haaretz. Not that you make differentiations within Yishuv Haaretz, which Yishuv is more important. And if the Mechaber would take a hold that there are different levels in Yishuv, the Mechaber should have clearly written it and not just left it hanging in such a way that the Smeh has to explain to you and fit words into the Mechaber to create this idea. One second. So therefore the Taz paskins, it's not so. If the Matzrin wants to build a house and the Lekeach wants to plant a tree, which are both Yishuv, the Matzrin's Yishuv comes first. The Matzrin only loses his right when he's doing something which is not Yishuv Haaretz. But if he's also doing Yishuv Haaretz, then how could you decide one Yishuv is more than the other? You can't. A Yishuv plus a Matzrin comes before Yishuv without a Matzrin. So therefore, according to that, what's the Mechaber saying in the second din? He says, if the Lekeach wants to plant grains, and the Matzrin wants to plant trees, then the Matzrin comes first. Because that is Yishuv versus not Yishuv. And therefore, the other way around, if the Lekeach wants to plant trees, and the Matzrin wants to plant grains, then the Lekeach comes first. Because you have a Yishuv versus non-Yishuv. That's what the Mechaber is telling you, and that's what the Mechaber says about the lintoya. That lintoya, even though planting and planting, you're planting a tree, you're planting grains. When the planting of a tree is koydem to planting grains, whichever way you're going to do it. That is essentially the Taz. This last addition that I explained to you how to understand the Mechaber according to the Taz is the way the Ulam HaMishpat over here clarifies the Taz. The Shoshanas Yaakov also goes into a discussion about this Taz. On the Taz, which is on the Smeh. Shoshanas Yaakov says, and the Shoshanas Yaakov disagrees. Shoshanas Yaakov says, no, planting is taken more important than trees. That planting trees is more important than is higher level than houses. Is more Yishuv Haaretz than houses. And that is Taka the Mashmos of the Gemara. Elamai, it has no relevance to this din. It's not about Bar Metzra. It's about Schus Kedima when a seller wants to sell to two people who have no additional rights to the property. When it's a Matzrin, Yishuv, and he has a Yishuv, so his Yishuv supports his Matzranos, he gets it. What the Gemara is talking about is a regular seller, and he has two clients in front of him, and they're arguing who gets the house, Who gets the purchase from him? Who's the one who gets it? So the Gemara over there says, Mitzad Yishuv Ha'aretz, choose the one that's going to do something more permanent. Yeah, not because of not to be mafkia matzronos. It's chutz kedima. That's it. Doesn't bring. But Shoshanas Yaakov maybe doesn't hold to this one. Now, in the Olam HaMishpat says, the Olam HaMishpat that I mentioned before, the way he explains the Taz, and he also disagrees on the Taz, and he brings the Smeh, he paskins like the Smeh, but disagrees with the logic of the Smeh. He says Natiyah does come before Batim, but not like he says, the understanding, the way he understood the Smeh, is that trees last longer in the ground than houses. Yeah, and they last for a longer time. Houses could come down, a tree could last. There's trees in America which are 1,000 years old. And not on this side of the country, on the other side of it, on the West Coast. But he says the Natiyah is more important. He says planting is more important. Why? He says he brings a proof from the Gemara that the planting is more important than building houses. That's what Olam HaMishpat says. Now let's go back to so now we have a machlekes Smeh and Taz. We have regarding if a Natiyah, if planting trees has preference over houses. If there's a level of preference within Yishuv to be mafkia din de bar mitzvah. Today it's going green. So the Choshen ve'efoid, the Mishpat Choshen Eisam Ches says, being that there's a machlekes in the Smeh and the Taz, so if the Matzrin wants to build a house and the Lekeach wants to plant trees, so he's mechalek like this. If it's before the sale happened, then the moicher, this is how he's machriya the whole machlekes, and the moicher has an obligation to sell to whoever is going to plant, to sell to the Matzrin. Sorry, to sell to the Matzah. Why? Because the Matzah has Yishuv and the Lekeach has Yishuv. And you shouldn't choose which Yishuv is better. But if you already sold to the Lekeach, that's when the Smez din kicks in. Then we say we cannot go against the Smeh to be moitzi miyad Lekeach. Because first you have a suffix. That's what he says. So he says that this. So but this is after the Ramah, and we're talking about in this din how to understand the mechaber. That's what he says. The Choshen Meifert says we can't be machriya and machlekes Smeh against the Taz. Therefore, it becomes a suffix machlekes apoiskim the lekeach lechatchila you should sell to the matzrin. But if the lekeach, you can't be moitzi from the lekeach based on against the Smeh. Now we all talked about planting trees. The Aruch HaShulchan gives a common sense thing. Yeah? Sifkot Nun Hey. That obviously we're talking about trees which are fruit-bearing trees and not fruit-bearing trees. And that is what comes before houses. And from this Aruch HaShulchan it looks like that the chshivas of the trees is because it bears fruit, not because it lasts longer in the ground or because it's more ingrained in the ground, which is not the way we understood the Smeh until now. But the way, if you're going to say that it's be something which is more kavua, more part of the ground, it makes no difference if it's a tree, which grows elonei srak, or a tree which grows fruits. But again, the reason why you have to do this is because every time you have such a psak, the matzrin loses. So if somebody plants, if the lekeach wants it for planting ilonei srak, so you're going to say according to the Aruch HaShulchan it doesn't work. But lav dafka, maybe others disagree with him. it's not so clear that's all ilanis. So you're not going to be able to be moitzi miyad halikeach. The Mishpat Sholem brings in the Shas Tshuvas Gur Aryeh Yehuda. Choshen Mishpat Siman Samachtes. That the Shas Tshuvas Gur Aryeh Yehuda understands. He says, according to the Smeh, this is what I originally mentioned in the beginning of the Seif, that you look on what's more permanent in the ground. So if somebody wants to build a house from stone and somebody wants to build a house from wood, the one who wants to build a house of stones comes first, has preference. Why? So if the Matzrin wants to build a shed of wood, and the Lekeach wants to put a foundation and everything and build a proper house, then the Shas Yehuda says, no, according to the Smeh, the one who builds a solid foundation and rocks house goes first. The Mishpat Shalom says, I understand. First of all, the Taz agrees and says you can't make a differentiation between Yishuv. And that is enough of a reason to not even go into a discussion. He says the Taz asks a question that you can't differentiate between Yishuv. He says, based on this Taz, you can't differentiate within one kind of Yishuv itself also, even according to the Smeh. But the mere fact that the Mishpat Shalom brings the Taz and doesn't really mention the Smeh, it seems like you could say, you could be medayek that the Mishpat Shalom is not like the shit of the Taz. Yeah, that's just conjecture.
Wait, how?
Because he brings it as a tzarich chiyun. He says, tzarich chiyun me'ataz, and doesn't tell you machlekes Taz Smeh, tzarich chiyun me'ataz. Which means for him, the Taz is a posek in this matter. Comes the Divrei Chaim, interesting tshuva in Choshen Mishpat Chelik Beis Siman Yudches. He says, if you have a lekeach who's a melamed tinoikus, and he bought the property for the purpose of opening up, for teaching kids in his house. So he is koydem to the matzrin. You can't take him out. Why? Because not the matzrin and not the moicher could be moiche. Nobody could be moiche in the melamed tinoikus. Why? Because the melamed tinoikus the concept of Yishuv ben Gamla, and that's part of Yishuv Eilam. So since nobody could, education is part of Yishuv Eilam. So if the melamed comes, he has Yishuv. The Yishuv is also by him Yishuv Eilam. Therefore, you can't, if the other one wants to build a private house or plant trees or whatever he wants, the matzrin loses out.
It's only according to the Smeh, right?
Yeah, according to the Smeh. According to the Taz, two different Yeshuvim don't, love Dafka, it would work according to the Taz. Now we'll move on to Sif Chav Zayin. Sif Chav Zayin is a Sif which is... That's the whole point. Comes Sif Chav Zayin, this is the whole, most of the Siman is almost never Bar Mitzvah. Comes Sif Chav Zayin, more exceptions to Bar Mitzvah, and Sif Chav Zayin Grad is a Sif which is more common in Bar Mitzvah than Sif Chavav, and the money ones is common, but this one's even more common. What does the Mechaber say? You have a field, one field is the Matzrin, next to him is a field of that the Lekech bought now. Between them you have a Rechev Dekolim, what's a line of palm trees, or a strong building, or a guma, or a ditch. So if you can't pass one telem echad means the cow and the ox when it plows makes one has what plows behind it. So if it could fit between the column to connect it even through a small sliver, the two together, you're already a matzah. If you don't have that, if there's no way to pass between them, then there's no dinner de bar mitzvah. What does the Smeh explain? What's rechav dekolim? That the dekolim are reichav one on top of another. They're so close to each other that you can't get through between them. So therefore, it's impossible to connect the two fields together. And therefore, the dinner de bar mitzvah is batal. Because the whole Chachamim was you can combine the two fields together. Here you cannot combine the two fields together. Why can't you combine the two fields together? You could take out the palm trees, right? The palm trees is a issur to take out a tree that's bearing fruit, whatever. We're going to get to it soon. Yeah, and same thing if you have a very big building between Binyan Gavoya and Chazak that you can't knock down, or you have a ditch. The Smeh says it's not guma. It's not a ditch. It's goime. Goime is soft, like in Parshas Noach. Why? Because if it's just a ditch, fill it up with earth and you connect it together. It's not a ditch. It has to be that soft earth that you cannot plant there. It's swamp. You have a swamp between the two. So therefore I can't do anything over there. And if I can't do anything, I can't combine the two together. If I can't combine the two together, there's goyme between them, then it's, huh?
You got the soft earth and put them in earth.
You can't get rid of soft earth, it's earth. The only way to do it, you have to plant eucalyptus trees over there. And they absorb a lot of water, and that dries up the swamps. So comes out from the Smeh that bar metzre, if there's no way to combine the two together, then it's always bar metzre. There's no din of bar metzre. But if you could combine them together, like pouring the earth in the ditch, there is bar metzre. Kesef HaKochim over here says that if the person has, if the matzran has, by him buying the property, he'll have a right to put in that area buildings in between the two properties, even if that means that he's going to have to close his own windows because of Hezekiah, or because he's going to have to lower his building or raise his building, the windows because of Hezekiah, still considered a matzrin. The only time there's not a matzrin is if the gap, if the area between the properties is a meitzar l'rabim. Is a meitzar shechziku b'rabim, is a path that people use, and he cannot block it. Then you can't combine the two together. Or the shachan has a right for that pathway, and therefore you can't combine them together. Then there's nothing about mitzvah. And it seems like from the Kesef HaKochim that even if you have to take on a significant expense to combine the two together, there's still din of bar mitzvah. However, the Choshen ve'efod, Mishpat Choshen Sefkot Lametes says, if there's a big tirche to the matzah to combine them together, a big tirche, a big expense, then the Bezdin has to determine whether it's worth it, such a large expense, for combining these two fields or not. And the Choshen ve'efod says, and even if the matzah says, I want to spend that money, it's not enough. The Bezdin has to determine if that's a valid investment or not. If the Bezdin determines that the outlay of money you're going to spend on, or the amount of work you're going to spend on combining the two together is going to generate, is going to be worth it to combine them, then it's good.
If you're not planning on combining it, even if it's no law, you're allowed to take it?
If you're not planning on combining it, then we're going to get to it later. Lav dafka is din of bar mitzvah. Yeah, so the Choshen ve'efod says there's no din of bar mitzvah. From Kesef HaKochim, it's mashma that we don't look at how much it costs. As long as it's possible to combine them together, there's din of bar mitzvah. From the Smeh, it's also mashma. As long as it's possible to combine them together, there's din of bar mitzvah, because he says you could fill up the ditch. So if so, why can't you knock down the trees? So l'chayil is because it's also knock down the trees or fruits or whatever it is. How does this apply today? This comes up in many cases. For example, you have two houses that are together. Yeah, we have it on all these blocks. You have it in other cities also. How does these houses? So now, if I want to combine the two houses together, if there's a solid foundational wall between them, or a firewall that I cannot break, legally, practically, it's going to take the whole thing down. Unless I take down both properties together and rebuild it as one, which is a big expense, then according to the Choshen Ve'efer, the big expense is not going to be Din Metzra. According to the Kesef HaKodshim, maybe there will be Din Metzra. According to the Siman, maybe there will be Din Metzra. What happens, If you're paying them 1.5 for each of the houses, you're not going to recoup, and you have to pay another $2 million to build the house. You just spent $5 million on the property. You could have bought yourself a bigger house elsewhere where you could combine them. What happens if you have two houses, let's say like not in this block, 2 blocks down? Yeah, when you have the alleyway between. So let's say I have the house on President and New York, and the house, let's say President and Brooklyn, whatever it is, one of them in the corner, and the house behind me is for sale, but between us is an alleyway. So I can't do the Metzra, right? Why? I can't combine them. It's Chizikul Beirabim. Unless I have a specific right to access it. So first you could build from on top. It might be shaykh. Depends how you do it. That's a good idea. Never think of that. Can't do a tunnel. But maybe you could build from on top. Might be shaykh to combine two together. So you might have the bar mitzvah because you could combine them. Or sometimes, depending on how that alleyway was set up, if you're the last house, you might be able to block it off and put a driveway there. The marshal on this block, the house on New York Avenue between President and Union, there is an alleyway coming from the other side. Partially, but it's blocked. I think it's an alleyway. Some blocks you have the last one is blocked. You go until the end, and you can't go right. You can't go through it because it depends how it was structured b'shaite when the houses were built. So over here, according to Kesef HaKodshim, if there's an alleyway that you cannot block, and let's say you cannot build on top of it, then there's no din of metzra. What happens if you have a ditch between the two properties? So you could fill it up, right? Now what happens if a lot of places, the reason why you have a ditch is for water control. A place like Las Vegas, you have along the whole city, you'll see certain ditches, which the purpose of it is to catch all the rainwater. It's a very dry place, and direct it. It's called Las Vegas Wash. And it goes through, and it's controlled by the government. You can't do anything within a certain amount of feet from there. You could scream from today to tomorrow. You could pay them, gonna shelf it. Other places, you have that the city's built in such a way you have ditches in between certain places, so the water could flow through them. California, you'll see them in certain streets. If you don't know what you're doing, you drive fast, suddenly you knock your car into the ground. In LA, you have it a lot. For the water to flow. Deep ditches. Venezuela also has it on the side. And so could you block such a ditch? No, but there's a way around it. You could put a pipe through it to direct the water, and then you could build on top of it. So that's a big expense. You have to get permits, and you have to get the whole thing. So again, it's going to go into the question: is this a worth it investment? According to the Choshen Ve'efer, the business is to determine if it's a worth it investment or not, and then determine if it's bar mitzvah or not. Kesef HaKodshim, no, it's already. If he wants to do it, he could do it. Another example of such a thing that could come up. A totally different example. There's a building with condos. I own an apartment on the 3rd floor. A house goes for sale on the 2nd floor. I have bar mitzvah right under me, right? Because I can make steps. I can combine them. If apartment goes for sale on the 1st floor, there's no bar mitzvah. And by the way, there's no shutzvah either. It's not chatzar shutzvah because I have no drissas regel into your property. You have no drissas regel into my property. Only the shared areas are together. So we're not shutzvim in this property. So it goes the whole din of shutzvahs. You can't claim that you're a shutaf and you have a schus to it. We'll get to it soon, yeah? Now, if you have let's say it's on two sides let's say you have it's on the same floor, and you have 2 units next to each other, you can combine them. What happens if it's only 2 units, if it's 4 units on one floor, and I have 1 unit on this side, 1 unit on that side? I can't combine them because there's public area between them. But if I have 2 units on the floor, which is certain buildings that got only 2 units on the floor, and then between them you have a hallway and the entrance to the elevator, it's very easy to combine them. Why? If I buy the 2 together, I automatically already could get a right to the middle, and then the whole expense that I have to combine the 2 units together is about $500. I put 1 lock on the door coming from the steps, So you can't open it you can't enter it. And I put the button of the elevator, also put a key into it. A few $100 for each one of those. And that's it. And then I combine the two together. So that, there's bar mitzvah. And these are things that come up the whole time. When is there bar mitzvah, and when is there no bar mitzvah? So, but in all these cases, you have to think well before you decide that there is no bar mitzvah. Now, what happens if the reason why you can't combine them is not a physical barrier? It's not because there's a binyan gadol, not because there's a ditch that you can't fill up, not because there is a rechav d'kolim. It's a legal problem. I have a house on Kingston, which is zoned commercial, and I have a store there. And then the house on Carroll Street goes for sale. That house is zoned residential. I can't combine the two together because I have to change the zoning. If I want to make the house on Kingston, I think Kingston is mixed, but Lomer Zogan will be only commercial. I would have to change the zoning from one and the other. I can't expand from one into the other. From commercial, I can't make my store into the residential. And I have to spend money. I have to go to the zoning board. It's a suffix if I'm going to get approved, I'm going to get a variance for chulu. And depends on which clerk I end up with at that time. And the question is, do you say in such a scenario that it's the same din over here and there's no din of the bar mitzvah or not? Because the barrier is only physical. The barrier is not a physical barrier. It's a din of the machusa barrier. You could say that it's similar to the rechav shel d'kolim if you say that the reason you don't take down the trees is not because you can't, or because it's a problem to take them down. Maybe the machus will also be a problem that cancels bar mitzvah. Yeah. Now. No, I could do it online.
You can't cut down the trees because of halacha? You can't cut down the trees because of halacha? Because the fruit trees?
That's the reason. Or because it's a big expense, depending how you understand it. Big tircha. So since we're discussing about combining, let's move to if I could combine them, but I don't want to combine them. L'mashal. Let's talk about houses. I have one house, this house, and I want to buy the one to my right goes for sale. I'm not going to combine them. I want to buy that one for renting out. So I could combine them, but I'm not going to combine them. Is there hayashav v'hatov in such a scenario or not? Hayashav v'hatov is only for me to combine them. But two houses, and I want to buy one for investment to rent out, is that considered hayashav v'hatov? So, Taka, the Shalos Hatshuva Shalom Meishiv, Tanyana, Siman Pei Gimel says, we're not misaken din the bar mitzvah in such a thing. Because there's no hayashav v'hatov to the matzrin in such a scenario. It's a little bit hard to understand. You don't have your business next door to you. It's much more geschmack, but that depends on who. But the concept is, he says, there's no din the bar mitzvah in such a thing.
The old halacha we discussed, if a person sells choshen karka, so he can, let's say, according to Shita says, you go buy now the next neighbors. If you're not planning to combine it, you don't even have choshen karka.
What do you mean? I want to buy them. The whole purpose is to be able to combine them. But if I specifically don't want to combine them, I buy it for investment.
I think that case is talking about that you have a field, you gave someone else a bit of the karka.
Yeah.
It becomes a matter also. So some sheet is older, you can buy the next thing also.
You could buy the next one also, yeah.
Yeah, and you're not planning to combine it out with the first one.
Combine part of it. Maybe you are one to combine it.
Yours even, right?
But you could combine it, you're not specifically wanting to combine it. But maybe that's a bit, the Shalom says that if you clearly say that you're going it for investment, you lose your right to bar mitzvah. By the way, when it comes to houses, all these dinim are when it comes to houses, because by houses, b'chlal is a machlekes. The Ramah passes that there is din bar mitzvah in the bottom, but the Rabbeinu Tam says there isn't. Passing like the Ramah. But ultimately, if you have an additional element in it, you could, it's already taina called that you could cancel bar mitzvah. And he says, and even if you don't say it for sure, that there's no bar mitzvah, but al-kupanim is a suffix if there's bar mitzvah or not, because it's a suffix if it's hayashav v'hatov or not. The moment there's a suffix if it's hayashav v'hatov or not, the Takas Chachamim goes out the window, and we go ukminu nadina shel Torah, and according to Torah, there is no that doesn't apply. But what happens if you don't want to buy it for the purpose of renting? You want to buy it because you want to put your relatives in there. You want to put your kids there, you want to put your grandparents there, you want to put your parents there. So the Shalas Meshuvas Ra'anach, Siman Kuf Yutes, says not only is he a Matzrin, he's more than a Matzrin. And Matzrin only wants it because he wants to have more comfortable living space. Here, you want to do, it's more of a Yoshev Atoiv than a Stam Matzrin because you want to have your parents in there. You want to have your kids there. So therefore, for sure, the Ra'anach is in the Suffolk. He says, for sure he's a Matzrin. Maybe he's even more than a regular Matzrin. The Sheilas Yavetz, Chelik Beis Siman Kuf Yitches, brings his Ra'anach and doesn't have the Suffolk B'chlal. He says the Suffolk of the Ra'anach, if he's more than a Matzrin, that's not a Suffolk. He's for sure more than a Matzrin. So if so, what happens if he's more than a Stam Matzrin? Huh? What happens if you have two Matzronim? Is he koidim or not? It's like I don't know. And what happens if you cannot combine them? And the whole reason, because all the discussion we had until now was when you could combine them, you can't combine them. Lamer Zogn is two houses, and I cannot combine them for whatever reason it is. So if it will be for the purpose of combining, there will be nothing in the Bar Metzrah. But now I want to buy it for the purpose of putting a relative in. Is there, maybe if I'm more than a Matzrin, I do have a right to put it in, to put a person in, to put a relative in. Maybe if it's in two separate, across the hall on the same floor in the building, 2 units, or 1 unit on the first floor, 1 unit on the third floor. Once you go into that you created, this Shilas Yavetz in the Ra'anach would say that you're more than a Matzrin, could create Yesh Mokim to somebody to argue that it's more than that. To claim Bar Metzrah. But again, ultimately it still remains a Suffolk, and your Shalas you could be Moitzi from Lakeach or not. The Shaila would be if there would be if there's a way for him to get it, and if the Matzrin, this would be more Negeya not to be Moitzi from Lakeach, because all this is Mitzat Tzfeikis. It will be more for the purpose of if who the Moicher should sell first to.
This child is really a child of Krimis Visa Knesset.
Yeah, that.
And we buy it for other people in the shop, you buy it for yourself to find it. Sure, it goes into that.
Into that category, yeah. But over here, because I got into it over here because we're discussing about the combining, if I don't want to combine it, or if I can't combine it but I want it for a relative, the Shaila, that maybe there will be Bar Metzrah over here. Enough. Now what happens if there's a Suffolk in Bar Metzrah and you're not Moitzi Miyad Lakeach? So a lot of times what the din would say, they would Mephias the Matzrin. Din of Pius to the Matzrin, which is mentioned in Paiskim later, Paiskim also, that the Matzrin will get a few dollars or something and he will, so even though because he has some Tviyah, but not a full Tviyah to it, so maybe he should have a right to get something more than just walk away and say you lost the case. Mephias the Matzrin. The other issue, a lot of times with Pius and Matzrin, is a lot of times it goes into a shaila of legality if you could force somebody to sell a house to somebody else or not. In New York, a lot of times it's a problem to paskin Bar Metzrah. So that's why you try to figure out a way to make it work or whatever to convince a person. The court will not enforce it. Court will never enforce a psak to force somebody to sell his house to somebody else, to transfer title. It's against public policy. That's the law. Doesn't take away the din, but it creates a problem. Divrei Chaim. Well, a person's coming to Bezdin because he got called to Bezdin and scared of a siruv, not because he wants to listen.
If someone's coming and they want to know if Apiveri has to leave,
he'll not, yeah, but if you make a psak, we have. What's the reason why you sign a shtar bararas when you started in Torah? You have to sign an arbitration agreement. It says we're both makabel upon ourselves to Bezdin, to be Mekayim, and a psak that comes out. These are the dayanim for this in this case, and these issues. Legally, without that, there's nothing. Kabbalah skinya pi halacha is enough, but legally it's not enough. So why do you have to sign it?
So legally, where does help?
Legally, shtar baris helps for sure.
Would it help that? Would it even
Not in bar mitzvah.
wouldn't help the
Not in bar mitzvah, not in tenant landlord, and in New York, not in child custody. The judge could decide to accept it if it's not against public policy. When it comes to tenant landlord, if it's against public policy, or when it comes to bar mitzvah, against public policy, the judge is going to throw it out. So the purpose of saying shtar baris is to be able to have it confirmed. Therefore, the Divrei Chaim, I think the Divrei Chaim or the Erech Shai, or I think so, the Divrei Chaim says that if you don't sign a shtar baris, you get a siruv. Even though you say, I'm willing to follow Allah, I'm a Kavakinian. Why? Because it shows you're not interested in doing something. From that comes out, interesting gedank. Could a Bezdin paskin something which they know is not going to be confirmed and not going to be followed?
Why not? I get it. What's the problem?
No. Why?
You have to follow basically what they said.
So I paskin the halach, yeah. But do I have to take that into consideration, the enforcement element of it, and find shittas and halacha to create a psak which is going to be followed or not?
You basically make sure the shaykhs and the they have to make sure.
That's a question. I heard that question once, and there's a swara for it. I don't agree with it, but I heard that swara in the past. Anyways, with that we conclude.
How much of appeals?